Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step into a world of misty ridgelines and endless forests where the Appalachian Mountains stretch like a quiet ocean of green and shadow. You stand at the edge of a narrow trail, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, the scent of pine and wood smoke lingering in the cool air. Somewhere in the distance a crow calls sharp and lonely, as if reminding you that you are very far from anything resembling comfort. And here is the part that might make you shift a little under your blanket. You probably would not survive this, not because you are weak, but because this place demands a kind of patience and endurance that modern life rarely asks of you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is there. It is always fascinating to imagine these quiet mountain stories drifting across the world. Now dim the lights and let yourself settle into the slow rhythm of another century. You begin your journey along a narrow path that winds between towering hardwood trees. Oak, chestnut and hickory rise above you, their branches knitting together into a canopy that filters the sunlight into soft, shifting patterns. The air feels cooler here, almost damp, even in the warmer months. Every step you take is uneven roots and stones pushing up beneath your boots, reminding you that nothing in this landscape has been shaped for ease. The Appalachian Mountains in the 1800s are not empty, though they may feel that way at first. Families live scattered across these hills, tucked into valleys, or perched on slopes, where a small clearing has been carved from the forest. There are no neat rows of houses, no tidy streets. Instead, each homestead exists like a small island separated by miles of rough terrain. Travel between them is slow, often taking hours or even days on foot or horseback. As you move deeper into the mountains, you begin to understand just how isolated this life truly is. The nearest town, if you can even call it that, may be a distant cluster of buildings, reachable only after a long journey. Supplies are scarce, and anything you cannot grow, hunt, or make yourself is a rare luxury. A simple iron tool or a bit of cloth might have travelled for weeks before reaching these hills. There's a widely accepted historical understanding that many Appalachian settlers in the early 1800s were descendants of Scots-Irish immigrants, bringing with them traditions of self-reliance, music and storytelling. You can almost sense that heritage in the quiet determination of the people who live here. They do not expect help to arrive. They expect to manage. At some point along the trail, you notice a faint curl of smoke rising through the trees. It's not much, just a thin grey thread drifting upward, but it is enough to signal life. You follow it carefully, stepping over a fallen log, brushing past low branches until the forest opens just slightly. There it is, a small clearing, uneven and rough, with tree stumps still scattered like reminders of the labour it took to create this space. At the centre stands a simple cabin built of logs, stacked carefully one atop another, their ends notched to hold together. The roof is low covered in wooden shingles that look weathered even from a distance. You pause for a moment, taking it in. This is not a temporary shelter. This is home. A lesser known detail often overlooked is that early Appalachian cabins were sometimes constructed without nails, relying entirely on the precision of notched locks and the weight of the structure itself. It is a quiet testament to the skill required just to create a place to sleep. As you step closer, the sounds of the forest shift. You hear the faint crackle of a fire from inside the cabin, maybe the soft clatter of someone moving about. There is no hum of machines, no distant traffic, nothing to soften the silence except the natural world. Even your own breathing feels louder here. You run your hand along one of the logs. It is rough, the bark long stripped away, but the surface still uneven. You can feel the work in it. Every tree had to be cut, trimmed, hauled and lifted into place without modern tools. It is hard to imagine the effort, yet here it stands, quiet and sturdy. Historians still debate how much of this isolation was chosen versus forced. Some suggest that many settlers deliberately sought out these remote areas to escape crowded coastal regions and maintain independence. Others argue that economic pressures left them little choice but to move into marginal lands that others had overlooked. Either way, the result is the same. You are here and there is no easy way back. The ground around the cabin is a mixture of dirt and sparse grass, worn down by constant use. A few tools lean against the wall. An axe, a hoe, perhaps a simple wooden bucket. Nearby you notice a small patch of cleared earth that might serve as a garden, though it looks modest at best. The soil here is rocky stubborn, not easily persuaded to yield crops. You take a slow breath, letting the atmosphere settle over you. There is a certain calm to it, a steady rhythm that feels almost comforting. But beneath that calm is a quiet tension. Every aspect of life here depends on effort. There is no safety net, no quick solution if something goes wrong. As you stand there, you begin to notice the small details that define this place. The way the sunlight shifts across the clearing, the distant sound of water, perhaps a creek running somewhere beyond the trees, the faint scent of smoke mingling with earth and leaves. It is beautiful in a quiet, understated way, but it is also demanding. You realise that arriving here is only the beginning. The mountains do not welcome you with open arms. They test you slowly and persistently, asking whether you can adapt, whether you can endure. And as the light begins to soften, casting longer shadows across the clearing, you feel that first subtle shift. The sense that time itself moves differently here. Slower, heavier, marked not by clocks, but by the turning of the sun and the changing of the seasons. You take one last look at the cabin, at the forest that surrounds it, and you understand something simple and profound. If you are going to live here, you will have to become part of it. You linger in the clearing just long enough for the quiet to settle into your bones, and then the reality of what must be done begins to press in. That cabin in front of you, rough as it is, did not simply appear. Someone stood where you are now and imagined it first. Then they set to work with little more than muscle patience, and a handful of tools that would feel almost primitive in your hands. If you are going to belong here, you will have to build. The process begins not with hammering or stacking, but with choosing. You walk the edge of the forest, studying the trees with a new kind of attention. Straight trunks are what you want, tall and even free of too many knots. Oak is strong but heavy. Pine is lighter and easier to work, though perhaps less durable over time. Every decision matters because once you start cutting, there is no easy correction. There is a widely recognised historical fact that most Appalachian settlers built what were called log cabins using hand tools like axes, adzes, and simple saws, often without access to mills or pre-cut lumber. You can feel the weight of that truth as you grip the handle of an axe. It is solid, slightly worn, the wood smooth where countless hands have held it before. The first swing is awkward. The second is no better. But gradually a rhythm begins to form. The sound echoes through the trees, a steady hollow thud that feels almost out of place in the otherwise quiet forest. Chips of wood scatter at your feet, the scent of fresh sap rising sharp and clean in the air. It takes time, far more time than you expect. Each tree resists you standing firm until enough blows have weakened it, and when it finally begins to lean, there is a brief moment of stillness, followed by a heavy crash that seems to ripple through the ground beneath you. You step back, catching your breath, and look at what you have done. One tree down, many more to go. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in regional accounts is that neighbours, though often miles apart, would occasionally gather for what became known as cabin raisings. These were communal efforts where multiple families help construct a home in a single intense period of labour. But here in this moment you have no such gathering. It is just you and the slow accumulation of effort. Once the trees are down, the real work begins. You strip away branches, trim the trunks to length, and begin shaping the ends. Notching is a careful process. Each cut must fit precisely with the next log, creating a stable corner that will hold the entire structure together. There is no room for guesswork. A poorly cut notch could mean a wall that leans or worse collapses. You kneel beside a log knife and axe, working together, shaving away small sections, testing the fit again and again. Your hands grow sore, then numb, then sore again. Splinters find their way into your skin. You learn to ignore them, or at least to set them aside until later. Historians still argue whether the standardization of notching techniques spread quickly across the Appalachian region, or developed in isolated pockets with unique local variations. As you work, it feels less like a standardized method and more like a personal negotiation with each piece of wood. Lifting the logs is another challenge entirely. Even a modest trunk is heavy awkward to handle alone. You brace your legs, grip tightly, and heave, inching it into place. The first layer goes down slowly, forming a rough square on the ground. Then another layer and another, each one locking into the corners with those carefully carved notches. The shape of the cabin begins to emerge almost imperceptibly at first. A few logs stacked together do not look like much, but as the walls rise even by a foot or two, you start to sense the boundaries of a space that will soon shelter you from wind, rain and cold. There is no rush here, though it might feel like there should be. The mountains do not care about your schedule. The sun sets when it will, and darkness arrives quickly beneath the trees. You learn to work with the light, not against it. At some point you pause to wipe sweat from your brow and notice the sounds around you again. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant murmur of that unseen creek. Life continues, indifferent to your effort, and yet in a quiet way you are reshaping a small part of this world. The walls eventually reach a height where you can no longer easily lift logs into place. This is where ingenuity comes in. You use levers, simple ramps, anything that can give you an advantage. It is slow, careful work, each movement deliberate. The gaps between the logs are another problem to solve. Air will slip through them easily, bringing cold with it when winter comes. So you gather materials, clay, mud bits of moss, and press them into the spaces. This process, known as chinking, is messy but essential. Your hands become coated in earth, your clothes stiff with dried mud. Inside the space is still open to the sky. The roof will come later, a structure of beams and shingles that must be carefully aligned to shed rain and snow. For now, you stand within these half-formed walls and imagine what it will become. A floor perhaps of packed earth. At first, later, maybe wooden planks if time and resources allow. A hearth for cooking and warmth. A simple bed raised just enough to keep you off the cold ground. You step back outside and look at the structure again. It is far from finished, but it is real. It exists because of your effort, your persistence. There is a quiet satisfaction in that realization, though it is tempered by the knowledge of how much remains to be done. The roof, the door, the chimney, each one a task as demanding as the last. The light begins to fade again, that same soft dimming you noticed before. Shadows stretch across the clearing and the air cools quickly. You set down your tools, muscles aching in a way that feels both exhausting and strangely grounding. This is how it begins. Not with comfort or certainty, but with work. Steady, unrelenting work that shapes both the land and the person standing on it. And as you take one last look at the rising walls of your cabin, you understand something else. Out here, survival is not a single moment of triumph. It is a process. One log, one cut, one long day at a time. By the time the walls of your cabin begin to resemble something that might keep out the wind, your body has already started to adjust to a new rhythm. It is not a comfortable rhythm, not at first, but it is steady. And here in the mountains, steadiness matters more than speed. You wake before the sun. There is no clock to check, no soft glow of a screen to ease you into the day. Instead you stir because the air has shifted. The chill of early morning creeps in through the gaps in your unfinished cabin, brushing against your skin until you can no longer ignore it. Your eyes open slowly, and for a moment you lie still listening. The forest is not silent. It never truly is. There is the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds beginning their day, and somewhere far off the steady trickle of water. It is a quiet that feels full, not empty. You push yourself upright, muscles stiff from the previous day's labour. Every movement reminds you of what you have done. Your shoulders ache. Your hands are rough, your back protests just a little more than you would like. But there is no time to linger. The fire has died down during the night. You kneel beside the hearth, carefully stirring the ashes, searching for any remaining warmth. If you are lucky, a faint glow still hides beneath the grey, waiting to be coaxed back to life. You gather small bits of kindling dry twigs, and gently feed the ember, blowing softly until a thin thread of smoke rises. There is a commonly noted fact that maintaining a continuous household fire was essential in 1800s Appalachian life. A starting one from scratch without matches could be time-consuming and difficult. You begin to understand why. The idea of letting it go completely cold feels like a small but significant failure. As the flame catches, growing from a fragile flicker into a steady burn, you feel a quiet sense of relief. Warmth returns slowly, pushing back the chill. The smell of smoke fills the cabin, settling into your clothes, your hair becoming part of you in a way that will be difficult to wash away. Water is next. There is no well nearby, no pump to draw from. Instead, you take up a wooden bucket and step outside the ground, cool beneath your feet. The path to the creek is not long, but it is uneven, winding through trees and over roots that seem determined to trip you. When you reach the water, you pause for a moment. It runs clear and cold over stones, the sound steady and calming. You dip the bucket carefully, watching as it fills, then lift it with both hands. It is heavier than you expect, and the walk back feels longer somehow, each step deliberate to avoid spilling what you have gathered. A lesser-known detail, often shared in local histories, is that some families would walk several times a day to fetch water, each trip a small but essential part of survival. It's easy to imagine how quickly that effort adds up. Back at the cabin, you set the bucket down and take a moment to stretch your arms. The day has barely begun, and already there is a sense of work pressing in from all sides. Food must be prepared. You do not have much, perhaps a bit of cornmeal, maybe some dried meat if you have been fortunate. Breakfast is simple, almost repetitive. You mix the cornmeal with water, forming a rough dough that can be cooked over the fire. The smell as it heats is plain but comforting, a reminder that even the simplest meal has value here. You eat slowly, aware that every bit matters. There is no excess, no easy replacement if supplies run low. Each bite is both nourishment and calculation. Once you finish, the real work of the day begins. There is always something that needs doing. The cabin is still incomplete. Logs must be shaped and lifted. Gaps must be filled. Tools need to be maintained, their edges sharpened to remain useful. And beyond the cabin, the land itself demands attention. You step outside again, the sun now beginning to filter through the trees. The clearing looks different in this light, less mysterious, more revealing. You can see the uneven ground, the scattered stumps, the places where more work is needed. You pick up your axe. The sound of chopping returns steady and repetitive. It becomes a kind of background rhythm, something your mind begins to drift alongside. Swing strike, pull back, again and again. Time stretches measured not in minutes, but in effort. At some point, you pause, leaning on the handle of the axe, and glance up at the sky. It is a habit that begins to form quickly. Without clocks, you learn to read the sun, to judge how much daylight remains, and how much more you can accomplish before it fades. Scholars continue to debate how Appalachian settlers perceived time in their daily lives, whether it was more fluid and tied to natural cycles rather than strict schedules. Standing here, watching the slow movement of light across the trees, it feels clear that time is something you experience, not something you track. By midday, your energy begins to dip. You return to the cabin for a brief rest, perhaps another small meal if supplies allow. There is no long break, no leisurely pause. Just enough time to recover before returning to the tasks waiting outside. The afternoon brings more of the same, but with a subtle shift. The light changes, becoming warmer, casting longer shadows. The sounds of the forest evolve as well. Birds quiet down, insects begin their steady hum. You continue working even as your body grows more tired. There is a certain determination that takes hold, a quiet insistence that you must keep going. Because here, stopping too soon has consequences. Every unfinished task lingers waiting for you the next day. As evening approaches, you begin to wind down. Tools are set aside, carefully placed where they can be found again. You take another trip to the creek if needed, ensuring you have enough water for the night. The fire is tended once more, built up to provide warmth as the temperature drops. Inside the cabin, the space feels slightly more familiar now. Still rough, still incomplete, but no longer entirely foreign. You sit near the fire, watching the flames flicker their light dancing across the log walls. There is no entertainment in the modern sense. No screens, no music at the touch of a button. Instead, there is the quiet crackle of wood, the shifting shadows, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. You might find your thoughts wandering, back to where you came from, to the world that feels distant now, or forward to what this place might become if you can endure long enough. The night settles in, fully wrapping the mountains in darkness. Outside, the forest continues its quiet life, unseen but always present. You lie down, pulling whatever covering you have, close feeling the lingering warmth of the fire. Your body aches, but it is a different kind of ache now, one that speaks of effort, of progress, however small. And as your eyes begin to close, you realize that this day, like the one before it and the many that will follow, is not defined by a single event. It is defined by the accumulation of small necessary actions. A fire kept alive, water carried, wood cut, And in this steady repetition, you begin to understand what life here truly is. Not dramatic, not easy, but constant. Morning comes again, but this time the rhythm feels slightly less foreign. Your body still protests as you rise, but there is a growing familiarity in the movements. You tend the fire, fetch water, and eat your simple meal with a kind of quiet focus. And then as the light spreads across the clearing, your attention shifts outward, because what little you have stored will not last forever. The forest stretching endlessly beyond your cabin is not just a backdrop. It is your pantry, your supplier, and sometimes your test. If you want meat, you will have to go and find it. You step into the trees with more purpose now, carrying a rifle if you have one, or perhaps a simple trap if ammunition is scarce. The ground is soft in places, layered with fallen leaves that muffle your footsteps. But even so, you quickly learn that the forest hears more than you expect. Every snapped twig feels loud. Every careless step echoes. So you slow down. You begin to watch more than you walk. Your eyes move across the ground, scanning for tracks. A faint impression in the mud, the disturbed leaves where something has passed. It is subtle, easy to miss if you are not paying attention. In the Appalachian region during the 1800s, hunting was not a sport, but a necessity, with deer, wild turkey, and small game like rabbits forming a large part of many families' diets. You begin to understand that this is less about skill with a weapon and more about patience. You crouch near a set of tracks studying them. They are not fresh, but not old either. You follow them slowly, carefully, your breathing shallow, your senses alert in a way that feels almost new. Time stretches again, but differently from before. Not measured in effort this time, but in waiting. At some point you stop completely. There is a stillness in the air, a subtle shift that you cannot quite explain. And then you see it. Movement slight but unmistakable. A deer partially hidden among the trees, its ears flicking as it listens. You hold your breath. Moments like this feel suspended, as if the entire forest has paused to watch what you will do next. You raise your weapon slowly, trying not to disturb the fragile balance. If you are lucky, if your aim is steady and your timing right, the shot is quick. The sound breaks the silence, sharply echoing through the trees before fading just as quickly. And then it is quiet again. You approach carefully, aware that this moment carries weight. This is not just success, it is sustenance. It is days of meals if handled properly. There is a detail often overlooked, that early settlers wasted very little of what they hunted. Meat was preserved, hides were used for clothing, or trade bones could be turned into tools. You begin to see how nothing here is taken lightly. But hunting is not always successful. There will be days when you return empty-handed, the forest offering nothing despite your efforts. On those days, you rely on other methods. Traps set along known paths, simple but effective. Snares for rabbits, perhaps, or baited traps for smaller animals. Setting them requires its own kind of knowledge. Placement matters. Timing matters. You learn to think not just like yourself, but like the creatures you are trying to catch. A curious piece of regional lore suggests that some hunters believed certain animals could sense human intention, becoming harder to catch if approached with too much eagerness. Whether or not that is true, you notice that rushing rarely works in your favour. You move through the forest differently now, more quietly, more deliberately. As the day progresses, the sun climbs higher, filtering through the canopy in shifting patterns. The air warms slightly, though it never quite loses that cool, damp quality. Insects begin to hum, a steady background sound that you gradually stop noticing. You check your traps. Some are empty, others show signs of disturbance, a bent branch, a disturbed patch of earth. And occasionally you find success, a rabbit caught small but valuable. You handle it carefully, aware that even this modest gain matters. There is a practical side to this work that quickly replaces any romantic idea you might have had. It is not about the thrill, it is about consistency, about ensuring that there is something to eat, not just today but tomorrow. As afternoon begins to lean toward evening, you make your way back toward the cabin. The path feels more familiar now, the landmarks easier to recognise. A fallen tree here, a cluster of rocks there. When you reach the clearing, the cabin stands, as you left it, quiet and waiting. You set down what you have gathered and begin the next phase of the process, preparing the meat. It is careful work, deliberate, guided by necessity rather than comfort. You focus on what needs to be done, keeping your movement steady. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how much traditional knowledge influenced these practices versus what settlers learned through trial and error in the Appalachian environment. Standing here hands busy, it feels like a blend of both. Inherited habits meeting immediate need. The fire becomes central again. You cook a portion for the evening meal. The smell richer than anything you have had in days. It fills the cabin, mixing with the ever-present scent of smoke. You eat slowly, appreciating not just the taste but the effort behind it. The rest must be preserved. If the weather allows, you might hang strips of meat to dry or smoke them over a low fire to extend their usefulness. It is not perfect. There is always a risk of spoilage, of something going wrong, but it is better than letting it go to waste. As darkness begins to settle, you sit back for a moment, letting the day catch up with you. There is a different kind of tiredness now, not just from physical labour, but from the constant awareness, the attention required to move through the forest and take from it what you need. And yet there is also a quiet sense of connection. You are beginning to understand the patterns here, the way the animals move, the way the forest breathes. It is not something you can fully explain, but you can feel it. The fire crackles softly beside you, casting a warm glow across the cabin walls. Outside, the mountains settle into night once more, the sounds shifting again as the day creatures retreat and others take their place. You lean back slightly, letting your eyes rest. Today you hunted, tomorrow you will do it again. Because out here, survival is not guaranteed by a single success. It is built patiently through repetition, through learning, through listening to a world that does not speak in words. And slowly, almost without noticing, you are learning how to hear it. The next morning carries a different kind of weight. Hunting gives you something immediate, a clear result, a meal you can hold in your hands by the end of the day. But farming asks for something else entirely. It asks for faith, patience, and a willingness to work for results you will not see for weeks, sometimes months. You step out into the clearing with a hoe resting over your shoulder, your eyes moving across the uneven patch of ground beside your cabin. This small space carved from stubborn earth will have to feed you as much as the forest does. The soil does not look promising. It is thin in places, packed with stones that seem to rise up no matter how often you clear them away. You kneel and press your fingers into it, feeling the resistance. This is not the rich farmland you might imagine from distant valleys. This is mountain soil, reluctant, demanding. In many parts of the Appalachian region, settlers relied heavily on crops like corn because it could grow in porous soil and on sloped land where other plants struggled. You can already see why. If anything is going to thrive here, it will need to be tough. You begin by clearing. Each swing of the hoe loosens a small patch of ground, breaking apart clumps of dirt and exposing more stones beneath. You pick them out one by one, tossing them aside into a growing pile at the edge of the clearing. It feels endless. For every stone you remove, another seems to appear. Time slips by in this slow, repetitive work. The sun rises higher, warming the air just enough to make the effort more taxing. Sweat gathers on your skin, mixing with the dust, until your hands and arms are coated in a thin layer of grit. You pause now and then, straightening your back, looking out at the trees as if they might offer some kind of encouragement. They do not. The mountains are quiet observers. They do not reward effort immediately, and they certainly do not make it easy. There is a lesser-known practice among some Appalachian families called hillside farming, where crops were planted along the contours of the land to reduce soil erosion. You begin to understand the logic of that approach as you notice how easily the loosened dirt shifts beneath your feet. Without care, even what little you have could wash away with the next heavy rain. So you adjust. You shape the ground into rough rows following the natural slope rather than fighting against it. It is not neat, not orderly in the way modern fields might be, but it feels more in tune with the land beneath you. Seeds come next. You reach into a small pouch, feeling the dry kernels of corn between your fingers. Each one holds a possibility, though nothing is guaranteed. You press them into the soil carefully, spacing them as best you can, covering them with a thin layer of earth. It feels almost too simple. After all that work, all that effort, the act of planting is quiet, almost anticlimactic. You step back and look at the rows barely visible against the uneven ground. Now you wait. Of course, waiting does not mean resting. There is always something else to do. Repairs on the cabin, gathering firewood, checking traps. But part of your attention stays with that patch of earth. You find yourself glancing at it as you pass, as if expecting to see change immediately. You will not. Growth here follows its own pace, one that cannot be hurried. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how much Appalachian settlers supplemented their diets with foraged foods compared to cultivated crops. Some believe wild resources remained the primary source of sustenance, especially in harsher areas like this. Others suggest that even small gardens played a crucial role in long-term survival. Standing here, you suspect it is not one or the other. It is both woven together. Days pass. The routine settles deeper into you. Morning, fires, water from the creek, work in the clearing, forays into the forest. And each day you check the soil. At first there is nothing. Then one morning you notice it. A small green shoot pushing up through the dirt. It is fragile, almost hesitant, but unmistakably alive. You crouch beside it, studying the tiny leaves. It is a quiet moment, but it carries weight. This is proof that something can grow here, that your effort has not been entirely misplaced. More shoots follow in the days after. Not all of them. Some spots remain bare seeds that never took hold. You feel a small frustration at those empty spaces, but there is no time to dwell on it. Loss is part of this life just as much as success. You tend the young plants carefully. Weeds begin to appear, thin green intruders that compete for what little nourishment the soil can offer. You pull them out by hand, working slowly so as not to disturb the crops. It is delicate work requiring attention and patience. Water becomes another concern. If the rains come, they may come too hard, washing away soil and seedlings alike. If they do not come, the ground dries cracking and unyielding. You carry water from the creek when you can, but it is not enough to sustain everything. There is a quiet tension in this balance, a reliance on forces beyond your control. A curious belief held by some mountain families suggested that planting by the phases of the moon could influence the success of crops. While it might sound unusual to you, you find yourself wondering as you look up at the night sky whether there is something to it. When your survival depends on so many uncertain factors, even small patterns begin to feel meaningful. The plants grow slowly, each day a little taller, each week a little stronger. You begin to recognize their progress in subtle ways, the widening of leaves, the deepening of colour. It becomes part of your routine, this quiet observation. And with it comes a new kind of connection, not just to the forest, but to the land you are shaping. The patch of soil that once felt stubborn and unyielding now feels almost familiar, not friendly exactly, but understood. As the sun sets on another day, you stand at the edge of your small field, looking out over the rows. They are still modest, still far from providing what you need, but they represent something important. A future. You turn back towards the cabin, the fire waiting to be tended, the evening settling in around you. The forest hums softly, the mountains holding their steady silence. Tomorrow will bring more work. It always does. But tonight there is a quiet satisfaction in knowing that you have planted something that might outlast the day, something that with enough care and a bit of luck might carry you through what lies ahead. The air changes before you fully notice it. It slips in quietly, a faint edge of cold in the mornings that was not there before. The light feels different too, softer, angled in a way that stretches shadows longer across the clearing. You find yourself pausing more often, glancing at the sky, sensing something approaching. Winter is not here yet, but it is coming. And that knowledge settles into your thoughts like a slow, steady weight. You stand near your small field looking at what has grown. The cornstalks rise higher now, leaves rustling faintly in the breeze. It is a relief to see them, to know that your effort has produced something tangible. But even as you take it in, another thought follows close behind. Will it be enough? Food out here is not just about the present. It is about what you can carry forward, what you can save, what you can stretch through the long, cold months when the forest grows quiet and the land offers very little in return. You begin to gather. Harvesting is careful work. You move through the rows, breaking off ears of corn, feeling their weight in your hands. Each one is a small victory, a piece of security against the uncertainty ahead. You pile them into a basket, the dry husks brushing softly against one another. In the Appalachian Mountains during the 1800s, corn was often dried and ground into meal, forming the basis of many daily meals like cornbread or mush. You can already imagine how these kernels will sustain you, simple and repetitive, but essential. Back at the cabin, the work continues. You sit with the harvested corn pulling back the husks, exposing the rows of kernels beneath. Some you leave partially covered, tying them together and hanging them to dry. Others you strip completely, preparing them for storage. The process is slow, almost meditative. Your hands move steadily, the repetitive motion allowing your mind to drift. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, carrying a cooler scent through the air. It reminds you again that time is moving, whether you are ready or not. There is another task waiting. Meat must be preserved as well. You think back to your hunts, to the effort it took to bring down even a single animal. Letting any of it spoil would feel almost unthinkable. So you prepare the fire differently this time, building it low and steady rather than hot and quick. Strips of meat are hung above the smoke, not too close to the flame. The goal is not to cook them fully, but to dry them slowly, letting the smoke seep in, preserving them for the weeks ahead. A detail that often surprises people is how heavily early mountain families relied on smokehouses or simple smoking methods to extend the life of meat, sometimes keeping it edible for months. Standing here watching the thin trails of smoke curl upward, you understand how vital that process is. The smell is strong, rich and persistent, It clings to everything. Your clothes, your hair, the very walls of the cabin. Over time, it becomes less noticeable, just another part of the environment you live in. As the days pass, your routine shifts. Less time is spent planting or building, and more is devoted to preparing. Gathering firewood becomes a priority. You stack it carefully near the cabin, creating a supply that you hope will last through the coldest nights. Each piece is a small safeguard, a promise of warmth when the temperature drops. Water too becomes more urgent. The creek still runs, but you know that in deep winter it may freeze at the edges, making each trip more difficult. You begin to plan to think ahead in ways that feel both practical and slightly anxious. There is a quiet tension in all of this, an awareness that no matter how much you prepare, there is always the possibility that it will not be enough. Some families in the region stored food in underground pits or root cellars using the natural coolness of the earth to preserve vegetables and other supplies. You consider this idea looking at the ground around your cabin, wondering if you have the time and energy to attempt something similar. Even the smallest improvement could make a difference. The evenings grow longer. Darkness arrives earlier now, settling over the mountains with a deeper stillness. You spend more time inside the cabin, the fire becoming the centre of your world. Its light flickers against the log walls, casting shifting patterns that feel almost hypnotic. You sit close to it, feeling the warmth on your skin, listening to the crackle of burning wood. Outside, the forest feels quieter, as if it too is preparing for what lies ahead. There is an idea often discussed among historians that winter in the Appalachian Mountains was one of the most defining challenges of daily life, shaping routines, decisions, and even community relationships. It's easy to see why. Everything you do now is aimed at facing that season. And still uncertainty remains. You look at your stores, the dried corn hanging in bunches, the strips of smoked meat, the growing stack of firewood. It is something certainly more than you had before. But is it enough to carry you through weeks of cold, through days when hunting becomes scarce and the land offers little? You cannot be sure. A small curious belief you may hear whispered in some parts of the mountains is that the thickness of a squirrel's fur in autumn could predict how harsh the coming winter would be. Whether there is any truth to that is unclear, but you find yourself noticing such details more, now searching for signs, for hints of what is to come. Because here knowledge is not always certain. Sometimes it is built from observation, from patterns, from stories passed down through generations. As night deepens, you settle near the fire once more. Your body is tired, but your mind lingers on the same thought. Preparation, readiness, the quiet hope that what you have done will be enough. The wind brushes against the cabin walls, a soft but persistent sound. And for the first time since you arrived, you begin to feel the true weight of the seasons here. Not just as a change in weather, but as a test. One that is coming closer with each passing day. The cold does not arrive all at once. It seeps in quietly at first, like a presence that waits at the edges before stepping fully into the room. Mornings grow sharper. The ground stiffens beneath your feet. Breath turns visible in the early light, drifting away in soft clouds that vanish as quickly as they appear. And in the midst of all this, you begin to notice something else. You are not alone here. Not in the way you might expect with neighbours close by or voices carried easily through the trees. No, this kind of company is quieter, more subtle. It reveals itself in traces, a worn path just beyond your clearing, the distant bark of a dog carried on the wind, the faint echo of an axe striking wood far enough away that it feels almost imagined. There are others living in these mountains. Families like yours scattered across the ridges and valleys, each one holding its own small space against the vastness around them. You may not see them often, but their presence becomes something you sense rather than observe. And every so often that distance closes. One afternoon, as you work near the edge of your clearing, you hear something unfamiliar. Not the usual sounds of forest or wind, but the soft rhythm of footsteps. You pause, straightening, slowly listening. The sound grows clearer. A figure appears between the trees, moving carefully along the uneven ground. For a brief moment, there is a flicker of tension. Out here, you cannot assume anything about a stranger. But as the person steps closer, you see the signs. Worn clothing tools carried over one shoulder. A face marked by the same kind of labour you know so well. Another settler. There is a moment of quiet acknowledgement as you face one another. No rush, no sudden movement. Just a shared understanding that both of you have carved out a life in a place that demands it. In the Appalachian region, it was common for families to live miles apart, yet still form loose networks of mutual support, helping one another during major tasks or times of need. You can see how such connections would form even between people who rarely meet. The conversation, when it begins, is simple. Names are exchanged. Questions asked not out of curiosity alone, but out of necessity. How far have you come? How is your harvest? Have you seen signs of game nearby? The words are few, but each one carries weight. You notice how quickly practical matters take precedence. There is no idle chatter, no long stories. Time and energy are too valuable for that. Instead, information is shared in a way that feels almost efficient. And yet, beneath that practicality, there is something else. Relief. A quiet easing of the isolation that has settled around you in the past weeks. Just hearing another voice, seeing another person who understands this life, brings a sense of balance you did not realize you were missing. The two of you walk the edge of your clearing, exchanging observations about the land. The soil here is better in some places, worse in others. Water sources shift with the seasons. Game patterns change as the weather cools. There is a kind of knowledge being passed between you. Not formally, not in lessons, but in shared experience. A small, interesting tradition sometimes mentioned in mountain communities is the idea of visiting without formal invitation, especially when travel was difficult and unpredictable. A traveller might arrive simply because they were passing through, and it would be understood that they would be received, offered food or rest if possible. You feel the weight of that expectation now. You invite them to sit to share what little you have. It is not much a simple meal, perhaps some corn and a bit of preserved meat. But the act of sharing feels significant. The two of you sit near the fire as the light begins to fade. Conversation slows, then drifts into quieter moments. There is no need to fill every silence. In fact, the pauses feel comfortable, natural in a way that might surprise you if you were used to constant noise. At some point, the topic turns to winter. It is unavoidable. You exchange thoughts on preparation, on what has been gathered, on what might still be needed. There is no clear answer, no certainty offered, just a shared recognition that the coming months will test everyone in these mountains. There's an ongoing question among those who study this period about how much these scattered families relied on one another versus maintaining strict independence. Sitting here, it feels like a balance. Independence in daily life, but a quiet understanding that at times help may be needed. As darkness settles fully, your visitor prepares to leave. There is no lingering farewell, no elaborate goodbye, just a nod, a few final words, and then they step back into the forest, disappearing as quietly as they arrived. The clearing feels different after they are gone. Not emptier exactly, but changed. You stand for a moment looking out into the trees, aware now of the invisible threads that connect you to others in this vast landscape. You may not see them often, but they are there, living their own days much as you live yours. Inside the cabin, the fire burns steadily. You sit close to it, letting the warmth settle into you. The memory of that brief encounter lingers, a reminder that even in a place defined by distance, there are moments of connection. And those moments matter. They break the rhythm just enough to remind you that this life, while solitary in many ways, is not entirely alone. You lean back slightly, listening to the soft crackle of the fire, the distant sounds of the forest settling into night. Tomorrow the work will continue. The chores, the preparation, the steady effort required to hold your place here. But now there is a subtle shift in how you see it, not just as your struggle, but as part of a wider pattern shared by others scattered across these mountains, each one carrying their own quiet story. The next morning, the quiet returns to its usual shape, but something inside you has shifted. You still wake to the same cold air, the same careful stirring of the fire, the same walk to the creek with your bucket brushing against your leg. Yet your thoughts linger on the visit from the day before. You begin to notice what might have once been invisible. Not just the presence of others, but the roles within a household like yours. Because as much as this life feels shaped by your own labour, it is rarely carried by one pair of hands alone. You imagine what this place would feel like with more than just you moving through it. And slowly, you begin to understand that in most Appalachian homes of this time, the weight of daily life is shared, though not always equally, and not always in ways that are immediately visible. You step back into the cabin and look around. The fire crackles softly. The smell of smoke clings to everything. Your tools rest where you left them. But there are tasks here that go beyond chopping wood or hauling water. Tasks that must be done again and again, often without notice, without pause. In many mountain households, women carried a tremendous portion of the daily workload, managing food preparation, clothing, childcare, and often contributing directly to farming and gathering as well. It is not a separate sphere of life. It is woven into everything. You begin to picture it more clearly. The morning would not just start with the fire, but with preparing meals for others, mixing cornmeal, tending pots, ensuring that everyone has something to carry them through the day. It would continue with washing, not with machines or flowing taps, but with water carried from the same creek you visit, heated, carefully used sparingly. You glance at your own hands, rough from labour, and imagine them engaged in finer, more repetitive work. Sewing, for instance. Clothing does not arrive from a distant store. It is made, repaired, reused until it can no longer hold together. Fabric is precious. Every scrap has value. You imagine sitting near the fire in the evening needle, moving steadily through cloth patching worn areas, reinforcing seams. There is a quiet patience in that kind of work, a rhythm different from chopping wood or hunting, but no less demanding. A small but intriguing detail recorded in some personal accounts is that women in these regions sometimes use natural dyes made from plants and bark to colour fabrics, creating subtle variations in clothing that reflected the landscape itself. It is a quiet form of creativity tucked within the necessities of survival. You step outside again, the air carrying a sharper chill now. The field waits, the rows of crops needing attention. And here too the labour is shared, planting, weeding, harvesting. It does not fall neatly into separate categories. Everyone contributes where they can, because the land does not care who does the work, only that it is done. You kneel beside the plants, pulling away weeds, your fingers moving carefully through the soil. It is steady work, almost calming in its repetition. But your thoughts continue to drift. You think about the weight of responsibility carried quietly in the background. Not just the visible efforts, but the constant awareness of what is needed next. The planning, the remembering, the small adjustments that keep everything moving forward. Some researchers have suggested that the resilience of Appalachian communities was deeply tied to this often overlooked labour, the steady, consistent work that ensured households functioned day after day. Without it, everything else would falter. You can feel the truth of that in the smallest details. The fire that stays lit, the food that is ready when needed, the clothing that holds together through long days of work. As the afternoon unfolds, you move between tasks. Back to the cabin where water must be heated, outside again where wood must be gathered. Each action connects to the next, forming a chain that stretches from morning to night without clear breaks. There is little room for rest. Even moments of pause are filled with something, preparing for the next task, thinking ahead to what might be needed tomorrow. It is a constant balancing act, one that requires both physical strength and quiet endurance. And yet there is a certain rhythm to it, a flow that once understood carries you forward. As the light begins to soften, you return inside the fire, already waiting to be tended. The cabin feels warmer now, more familiar. You settle near the hearth, letting the heat ease some of the tension from your muscles. You imagine what evenings might be like in a fuller household. The quiet murmur of voices, the soft sound of work continuing even as the day winds down, hands busy with mending or preparing for the next day, while stories or simple conversation drift through the room. There is an ongoing discussion among those who study this way of life about how much agency women had within these households, whether their roles were primarily constrained or whether they exercised a form of influence through their essential contributions. Sitting here, it feels less like a simple answer and more like a complex balance. Because while the work is demanding, it is also central. Without it, nothing holds together. The fire burns lower as night deepens. You shift slightly, pulling closer to the warmth, listening to the steady crackle. Outside, the forest settles once more, the sounds of the day giving way to the quieter rhythms of night. There is a different kind of respect forming in your mind now, not just for the land or the effort required to survive here, but for the layers of work that make that survival possible. The tasks that repeat quietly day after day, often unnoticed yet absolutely essential. You let your eyes rest the glow of the fire soft against the walls. Tomorrow will bring the same pattern, the same series of actions, the same steady movement from one task to the next. But now you understand it a little more fully, not just as labour, but as a shared effort carried in many ways, some visible, some hidden, all necessary. The morning feels sharper now, the kind that nudges you awake before you're ready. You sit up slowly, noticing how quickly your body has adapted to this life, even as it continues to resist it in small ways. The fire needs tending, the water needs fetching, the routine begins again. But today your thoughts turn to something else. Not just how you live, but how someone younger would. Because in this world, childhood does not stretch out gently the way it might elsewhere. It narrows quickly, shaped by necessity rather than choice. There is no long period of ease, no slow transition into responsibility. It begins early. You step outside the frost, clinging lightly to the edges of the clearing, and imagine a smaller set of footprints beside your own. A child moving through this same space, learning not through instruction alone, but through observation, repetition, and expectation. In many Appalachian families, during the 1800s, children began contributing to household work at a very young age, often as soon as they were physically able to gather, or tend small tasks. You can see how that would unfold naturally here. There is simply too much to do. A child might start with simple things, gathering kindling, small sticks scattered across the forest floor, carrying water in smaller containers, learning to balance the weight carefully to avoid spilling, watching the fire, making sure it does not fade when no one else is nearby. At first it might seem like play, walking through the trees, picking up branches, feeling the textures of bark and leaves. But gradually, the meaning shifts. These are not games. These are responsibilities, small at first, but growing steadily with time. You move toward the edge of the clearing, looking down the path that leads to the creek. It's not difficult to imagine a child walking it, perhaps hesitating at first, then growing more confident with each trip, learning where the ground dips, where the roots rise, where the footing becomes uncertain. Knowledge that settles into the body rather than the mind. A curious detail found in some personal recollections is that children in these regions often developed an acute awareness of their surroundings at an early age, able to recognize animal tracks or changes in weather patterns long before they could read or write. It is a different kind of education, one shaped by necessity. You return to the cabin and pause at the doorway. Inside, the fire glows softly, and you picture a child sitting nearby, watching, learning how to tend it properly. Not through formal instruction, but through quiet correction. A misplaced log adjusted. A flame encouraged or reduced. Mistakes are part of the process, but here mistakes carry consequences. A neglected fire means cold. Spilled water means another trip to the creek. There is a weight to each action that encourages careful attention. As the day unfolds, you move through your usual tasks, but with a new awareness. You imagine smaller hands helping where they can, holding tools that are slightly too large, mimicking your movements, learning by doing rather than by being told. In the field, a child might follow behind pulling weeds, their movements less efficient, but no less important. In the forest, they might gather berries or watch for signs of movement, their senses sharpening with each outing. There is little separation between work and learning. They are the same thing. Some accounts suggest that formal schooling in these mountain areas was irregular at best during this period, with children often attending only when time and distance allowed. Many learned basic reading and writing at home, if at all their education shaped more by daily life than by structured lessons. You can see how that would happen. When survival depends on constant effort, time becomes a resource that cannot easily be spared. The idea of sitting still for long periods, focusing on books, feels distant compared to the immediate needs of the day. And yet knowledge still passes on, not in classrooms, but in conversations, in demonstrations, in the quiet repetition of tasks. How to set a trap, how to recognize safe plants, how to judge the weather by the sky or the feel of the air. You pause for a moment, leaning against the rough wall of the cabin, considering this. There is a kind of resilience being built here, one that forms early and deeply. But it comes at a cost. Childhood, as you might imagine, it is shortened. There is less room for idleness, for wandering thoughts, for the kind of carefree moments that feel separate from responsibility. Instead, there is a steady movement toward usefulness, toward contribution. As the afternoon light begins to soften, you head toward the creek once more. The path feels familiar now, your steps sure, your balance steady. You imagine a child walking beside you, perhaps asking questions, perhaps simply observing in silence. There's an ongoing discussion among those who study this period about how children in such environments perceive their roles, whether they felt burdened by responsibility or whether it simply felt like a natural part of life. Standing here, it seems likely that the answer shifts depending on the moment. Some days the work might feel heavy. Other days it might feel like belonging. You fill your bucket, the water cold and clear, and begin the walk back. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows through the trees. The air cools quickly now, carrying that familiar hint of the coming winter. Back at the cabin, you set the bucket down and tend the fire once more. The evening settles in quietly. You sit near the hearth, the warmth steady, the light soft. Your thoughts drift again, this time with a quieter tone. Not just about the work or the effort, but about the continuity of it all. How knowledge passes from one generation to the next. How skills are learned not through instruction alone, but through living. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. Out here, growing up does not wait. It arrives gradually, woven into each day, each task, each small responsibility. And before you even realise it, it becomes simply the way things are. The day begins as it always does, but there is a subtle anticipation in the air that you cannot quite explain. You step outside with your bucket, the ground crisp beneath your feet, and pause for a moment. The forest feels different today, not quieter exactly, but expectant, as if something is about to happen, or perhaps something is already unfolding just beyond your awareness. You follow the familiar path to the creek, the cold air brushing against your face, and as you return you notice it. A sound, faint at first, then clearer. Voices. Not just one or two, but several carried through the trees in uneven fragments. You stop listening carefully, trying to place the direction. It is not close, but not distant either. It draws you in. You set the bucket down near the cabin and begin to walk, following the sound along a narrow trail you have not taken before. The forest opens slightly as you move forward, the trees thinning just enough to reveal a small gathering. A handful of people stand together in a clearing, their figures outlined by the soft afternoon light. There is no structure here, no building, just open ground and a shared purpose that pulls them into one place. You hesitate at the edge, uncertain for a moment, but then someone notices you. A nod, a quiet gesture that invites you closer. You step forward. There is no formal introduction, no ceremony of arrival. Just a gradual inclusion, as if your presence is simply another piece of the moment. You realise quickly that this is not a casual meeting. It is a gathering shaped by belief. In the Appalachian Mountains during the 1800s, many communities held religious meetings in open spaces or simple structures, often led by itinerant preachers who travelled between scattered settlements. You can see how such gatherings would take form here, where distance makes permanence difficult. The group settles into a loose arrangement, some standing, others seated on logs or the ground itself. The air carries a quiet seriousness, but not a heavy one. There is warmth here, a sense of shared understanding. A man steps forward. His clothing is plain, his posture steady. He begins to speak, his voice calm but clear, rising and falling, with a rhythm that feels almost musical. The words are simple, drawn from familiar ideas, but the way they are delivered gives them weight. You listen, not just to the meaning, but to the cadence, the pauses, the way the silence between sentences seems to hold as much importance as the words themselves. Around you others respond in quiet ways. A nod here, a murmur of agreement there. It is not a performance. It is something more intimate. A lesser-known aspect of these gatherings is that they often blended formal religious teachings with local traditions and interpretations, creating a unique expression of belief that varied from one valley to the next. You can sense that fluidity here, the way the message feels both structured and personal. As the speaker continues, your attention drifts slightly, taking in the details around you. A woman closes her eyes, her hands resting loosely in her lap. A child shifts quietly beside her, watching with a mixture of curiosity and stillness. An older man leans forward, his gaze fixed as if each word carries something he has been waiting to hear. There is no rush. Time stretches in a different way, here shaped not by tasks or daylight, but by attention. At some point the speaking softens, giving way to song. It begins with a single voice, tentative at first, then joined by others. The melody is simple, the harmonies unpolished but sincere. It rises into the open air, carrying through the trees in a way that feels both fragile and enduring. You feel it more than you analyse it. A connection not just to the people around you, but to something larger, something that threads through these mountains in quiet, persistent ways. There is an idea often explored by those who study these communities that religion here was not just a matter of belief, but a central part of social life, providing structure, meaning, and a rare opportunity for people to come together. Standing here, it feels less like an abstract concept and more like a lived reality. The gathering continues, shifting between words and song, between stillness and shared voice. And then gradually it begins to wind down. There is no formal ending. People begin to move slowly at first, then with more purpose. Conversations form in small clusters, brief exchanges that carry practical as well as personal meaning. News is shared, questions are asked, plans are hinted at. You find yourself drawn into these smaller moments. A few words exchanged with someone you do not yet know, a nod of recognition from another. It is subtle, but it builds a sense of connection that feels different from the brief encounter you had before. This is not just a meeting. It is a moment where distance is temporarily erased. As the light begins to fade, people start to leave, one by one disappearing back into the forest, along the paths they came from. The clearing empties, gradually the voice is fading, until only the natural sounds remain. You linger for a moment. The space feels changed now, marked by what has just taken place, even as it returns to its quiet state. Then you turn and begin your walk back. The path feels different somehow, as if the forest itself has shifted slightly in your perception. The trees are the same, the ground unchanged, but your awareness of the life within it has deepened. Back at the cabin, the fire waits. You tend it carefully, the familiar routine grounding you once more. The warmth spreads through the space, the light soft against the log walls. You sit for a while, letting the memory of the gathering settle. Not just the words or the songs, but the feeling of being part of something shared. Out here, where distance shapes so much of daily life, moments like that carry a quiet importance. They remind you that even in isolation, there are threads that connect you to others. Threads that stretch across valleys and ridges, held together by belief, by need, by the simple act of coming together when the opportunity arises. You lean back slightly, listening to the fire, the forest beyond. And for a little while, the mountains feel less distant, less silent, more alive than before. The quiet returns after the gathering, but it does not feel quite the same as before. You move through your morning as usual, tending the fire, carrying water, stepping into the clearing, with that steady awareness of what needs to be done. Yet there is a lingering sense that the mountains are not as empty as they once seemed. You begin to notice distance differently, not just as space between places, but as something that shapes your entire way of living. The nearest neighbour is not a quick walk. The nearest store, if one exists at all, might be a long journey over uneven trails. Even the idea of sending a message feels uncertain, dependent on chance encounters rather than reliable routes. It settles in slowly, this feeling of being far from everything. You step out beyond the clearing, following a path that curves along the hillside. The trees rise tall around you, their branches shifting gently in the breeze. There is a kind of beauty in it, a quiet, uninterrupted stretch of nature that feels almost endless. But that same beauty carries a cost. Travel is not simple here. In much of the Appalachian region during the 1800s, roads were limited or poorly maintained, and many people relied on narrow trails, rivers, or horseback to move between settlements. You feel that reality with each step, the uneven ground reminding you that even short distances require effort. You continue along the path, your pace steady. The forest opens slightly in places, offering brief glimpses of distant ridges layered one behind another. The view is striking, almost peaceful, but it also emphasizes just how far everything is from everything else. You imagine needing to reach another family in a hurry, an injury, a sudden illness. The thought lingers for a moment, and you feel a quiet unease. Help is not immediate here. It must be sought often with time you may not have, and yet people still move. You begin to notice signs again. A faint track where the ground has been worn down by repeated passage, a broken branch at shoulder height marking a path that might not be obvious at first glance. These small indicators become important, guiding you through a landscape that does not offer clear directions. A small but fascinating detail noted in some accounts is that travellers in these mountains sometimes left subtle markers, bent saplings, or arranged stones to help others navigate difficult terrain. It's a quiet form of communication, one that speaks without words. You follow one such path for a while, curious where it might lead. The air grows cooler as you move into a shaded hollow, the ground damp beneath your boots. The sound of water grows louder, a creek winding through the space, its surface catching the light in brief flashes. You pause there listening. The steady flow of water has a calming effect, a reminder that not everything here is shaped by effort. Some things simply exist, moving at their own pace. You sit for a moment on a fallen log, letting the stillness settle. It's easy to see how isolation might feel overwhelming at times. Days can pass with little more than your own thoughts and the sounds of the forest. Conversation becomes rare, something to be remembered rather than expected. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how this isolation influenced the culture of the region, whether it fostered independence or reinforced close-knit bonds when people did come together. Sitting here, it feels like both could be true. You rise again, continuing along the path. As the day moves forward, you eventually come across something unexpected, a small structure partially hidden among the trees. It is not much, a rough shelter perhaps used by travellers or hunters. The logs are weathered, the roof uneven, but it stands as a sign that others have passed this way, have paused here, have needed a place to rest. You step inside briefly. The air is still carrying the faint scent of old smoke. There is no one here now, but the space feels used, lived in, even if only temporarily. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the rough texture beneath your fingers. It is a reminder that movement through these mountains is not constant, but it is not absent either. People pass through. They leave traces small and subtle, but enough to suggest a network of paths connecting distant points. You step back outside the lights, beginning to shift toward evening. The return journey feels longer, not because the distance has changed, but because your awareness of it has deepened. Each step carries a sense of scale of how far you are from any central place, from anything resembling a hub of activity. And yet there is also a quiet acceptance forming. This is the nature of this life. Distance is not something to be overcome easily. It is something to be lived with, understood, and gradually incorporated into your routine. By the time you reach your clearing, the light has softened, casting long shadows across the ground. The cabin stands where you left it, steady and familiar. You set down your tools and move inside, tending the fire once more. The warmth spreads slowly, pushing back the cool air that follows you in. As you sit near the hearth, your thoughts drift back to the path, the shelter, the faint markers left by others. The mountains may separate people physically, but they also create a kind of shared experience. Everyone here understands distance. Everyone feels it. And because of that, the moments when distance is crossed, when paths intersect, carry a deeper meaning. You lean back slightly, listening to the fire, the quiet settling in around you once more. The isolation is still there, but now it feels less like emptiness, and more like space. Space that holds quiet connections, subtle signs, and the knowledge that even in the most remote places you are not entirely cut off from the world beyond your clearing. Evenings begin to stretch longer now, the darkness arriving early and settling deep into the folds of the mountains. The work of the day slows not because everything is finished, but because the light no longer allows you to continue. You move inside, close to the fire, where the glow becomes the centre of everything. This is where the pace changes, not faster or slower, but softer. You sit on a rough stool, the warmth brushing against your face, and for a moment there is nothing to do. No wood to chop, no water to carry, no soil to turn. Just the steady crackle of burning logs and the quiet presence of the night pressing against the cabin walls. It is here in these quieter hours that something else takes shape. You reach for a small object, perhaps a piece of wood, perhaps something worn smooth from use, and begin to carve. The knife moves slowly, shaving thin curls that fall into your lap. It is not urgent work. It does not need to be finished tonight or even tomorrow. It is simply something to do with your hands. In many Appalachian households, evenings were often spent on tasks like carving, mending, or weaving, activities that required attention but allowed the mind to wander. You can feel that balance now, the way your thoughts drift while your hands remain steady. The firelight flickers, casting shifting shadows that move along the walls. They stretch and contract, turning familiar shapes into something almost dreamlike. You find yourself watching them for a moment, following their movement as if they are telling a story of their own. And then, almost without noticing how it begins, you start to remember not just the events of your day, but fragments of stories, bits of knowledge that feel less like facts and more like something passed along. You imagine voices not loud or insistent, but calm, steady, speaking into the quiet. Storytelling holds a quiet importance here. Without books readily available, without written records, for every detail of life, stories become a way to carry memory forward. They pass from one person to another, changing slightly each time, shaped by the teller as much as by the tale itself. You lean back slightly, letting your hands rest. The fire continues its steady rhythm, and in that sound, it becomes easy to imagine a room filled with others. Voices rising and falling, laughter soft and brief. The occasional pause where everyone seems to listen more closely. Some stories are practical, accounts of past winters, of what worked and what did not. Lessons hidden within simple narratives passed along so that others might avoid the same mistakes. You can almost hear someone explaining how to store food more effectively or how to read the signs of a coming storm. Other stories drift further from the immediate. Tales of unusual encounters, of things glimpsed in the forest that do not quite fit into ordinary explanation. A shape moving between the trees at dusk. A sound that cannot be easily placed. These stories are not always meant to be believed in a literal sense, but they carry a certain weight all the same. A curious element of Appalachian folklore includes tales of mysterious lights seen in the mountains at night, sometimes described as flickering orbs that appear and vanish without clear cause. Whether these were natural phenomena or something imagined, they became part of the shared experience of the region. You glance toward the door, the darkness beyond it, deep and still. It is easy to understand how such stories might take hold here, where the night feels thick and the boundaries between what is known and unknown seem less certain. You return your attention to the fire. The warmth is steady, the light comforting. You pick up your carving again, the motion slow and deliberate. Each small movement adds to the shape forming in your hands, though its purpose may not yet be clear. Time passes quietly. There is no urgency in these moments, no pressure to move faster or accomplish more. The day has already demanded what it will. Now there is space to simply exist within the rhythm you have created. There is an idea often explored by those who look back on this way of life that these evening hours were not just a time of rest, but a time of connection, of reinforcing bonds and sharing experiences. Sitting here even alone, you can sense how that would feel. The fire becomes more than warmth. It becomes a gathering point. Even if the gathering is only in your mind, you imagine the voices again, the stories weaving together, some grounded in reality, others drifting into something more imaginative, each one carrying a piece of the world you now inhabit. The night deepens. Outside the forest continues its quiet life, unseen, but always present. The sounds shift subtle and steady, a reminder that even in darkness, nothing truly stops. You set your carving aside, placing it carefully near the wall. The shape is not finished, but that is fine. It does not need to be. There will be other evenings, other moments to return to it. You stretch slightly, feeling the familiar ache in your muscles softened now by the warmth of the fire. And as you settle closer to it, letting the light flicker across your face, you realize something gentle but important. These quiet hours matter, not because they change your circumstances or solve the challenges of the day, but because they offer a different kind of balance. A pause, a space where the mind can wander, where stories can take root, where the weight of the day can ease just enough to carry you into the next. You close your eyes for a moment listening. The fire, the wind, the faint distant sounds of the mountains at night. And within that quiet, you begin to understand how stories like the life you are living are built slowly, one moment at a time. The morning feels heavier today, though nothing obvious has changed. You rise as usual, coax the fire back to life, and step outside with your bucket in hand. The air is colder now, pressing gently against your skin, and the forest seems to hold its breath in a way that feels almost watchful. You move more slowly without realizing it, as if something in you senses that this day will not follow the usual pattern. It begins with a small discomfort, nothing dramatic, just a faint ache easy to ignore at first. You carry water, tend to the fire, and move through your tasks as you always do. But the feeling lingers, growing slightly with each movement, a quiet reminder that something is not quite right. Out here, even the smallest change matters. There is no easy way to set it aside. You sit for a moment near the fire, pressing your hand against your side, trying to judge the feeling. It could be nothing, a strain from the work of the previous days, a momentary weakness that will pass on its own, or it could be something more. In the Appalachian Mountains during the 1800s, access to trained medical care was extremely limited, with many families relying on home remedies, herbal knowledge, and whatever experience had been passed down through generations. The thought settles into your mind quietly. If this grows worse, you will have to manage it yourself. You stand again, moving carefully, testing your balance, your strength. The work does not stop. It cannot. The fire still needs tending. The water still needs carrying. But now each task carries a layer of awareness that was not there before. You move to the doorway, pausing as a wave of discomfort passes through you. It fades quickly, but it leaves behind a trace of uncertainty. The forest outside looks the same. The trees stand tall, the clearing unchanged, and yet your experience of it has shifted. The distance to the creek feels longer, the weight of the bucket heavier. You step forward anyway. The path is familiar, your feet knowing where to go even as your thoughts drift. You reach the creek, kneel and fill the bucket, the cold water steady and clear. For a moment you let your hand rest in it, the chill grounding you. Then you lift the bucket and begin the walk back. Each step requires a little more attention now. You move carefully, not wanting to slip, not wanting to make a small problem worse. The uneven ground feels more pronounced, the roots more intrusive. You reach the cabin and set the bucket down with a quiet exhale. Inside, the fire waits. You sit again closer this time, letting the warmth settle into you. Your thoughts begin to shift, moving from denial toward preparation. If this does not pass, what will you do? There are plants in the forest that can help. You have seen them before, perhaps without fully understanding their value. Leaves that can be brewed into teas, roots that can be crushed and applied to the skin, knowledge that exists not in books, but in memory, in stories, in the quiet passing of information from one person to another. A small but intriguing note found in various accounts is that certain Appalachian families kept mental catalogues of useful plants, identifying them not by formal names, but by appearance, location, and effect. You try to recall what you know, piecing together fragments of that knowledge. You rise slowly and step outside again. The forest feels different now, not just as a source of food or wood, but as something that might offer relief. You move more carefully, scanning the ground and undergrowth, looking for familiar shapes. A cluster of leaves catches your eye. You kneel beside it, studying the pattern, the colour, the way it grows. It matches what you remember, or at least close enough. You gather a small amount, handling it with care. There is a quiet uncertainty in this process. You're relying on memory, on fragments of understanding that may or may not be complete. But here, that is often all you have. You return to the cabin and prepare the leaves, crushing them gently, adding water, setting them near the fire to warm. The smell is faint, earthy, not unpleasant. You sip slowly, letting the warmth spread through you. Time passes. The discomfort shifts, easing slightly, then returning, then easing again. It is not a clear change, not something you can easily measure, but it is something. You sit quietly, listening to your body, trying to understand what it is telling you. There is an ongoing discussion among those who study these communities about how effective these remedies truly were, whether they provided real relief or simply offered a sense of control in uncertain situations. Sitting here, you realize that both possibilities may exist at once, because sometimes the act of doing something is as important as the result. As the day moves on, you rest more than usual. The work continues, but at a slower pace. You choose tasks, carefully avoiding anything that feels too demanding. It is a strange adjustment, this need to hold back to conserve energy rather than spend it freely. The light begins to fade. You tend the fire again, the familiar motion grounding you. The cabin feels smaller now, more enclosed, as if the walls themselves are holding you in place. Outside, the forest settles into evening. Inside, you sit close to the warmth, your thoughts quieter than before. The initial concern has softened, replaced by a steady awareness. You are not entirely well, but you are not entirely unwell either. For now, that is enough. You lean back slightly, letting your eyes rest. Out here, health is not something you can take for granted. It shifts sometimes without warning, reminding you that your body is as much a part of this environment as the land itself. It responds to the same pressures, the same changes. And just like the land, it requires attention, care, patience. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the fire, the quiet of the cabin, the steady presence of the mountains beyond. Tomorrow may bring improvement, or it may not. But either way, you'll meet it the same way you meet everything here, one step at a time. The next morning arrives with a quiet sense of steadiness. You wake and take a moment before moving, listening to your body, measuring the small signals it gives you. The discomfort from yesterday has eased, not entirely gone, but softened enough that you can rise without hesitation. It feels like a small victory, one you do not take lightly. The fire is still alive beneath its layer of ash. You stir it gently, feeding it with dry kindling until the flames return steady and reliable. The routine settles around you again, familiar and grounding. Water must be carried. Food must be prepared. The day must begin. But today, your thoughts shift towards something different. Not just survival, but exchange. Because no matter how much you can gather or grow on your own, there will always be things you do not have. And in these mountains where distance separates people and resources are unevenly distributed, the idea of trade becomes essential. You step outside looking at what you have. A small store of dried corn, some strips of smoked meat, perhaps a few items you have crafted with your hands, simple but useful. None of it feels abundant yet. It may be enough to offer in exchange for something you need. In many Appalachian communities of the 1800s, formal currency was scarce and people often relied on bartering goods and services rather than using money. You begin to understand how that system takes shape here, where value is measured not in coins but in usefulness. You consider what you might need. Salt, perhaps? Something difficult to obtain on your own, yet essential for preserving food. A sturdier tool, a piece of cloth. Each item carries weight not just as an object, but as a solution to a problem. The path to trade is not always clear. There is no central marketplace waiting for you just beyond the trees. Instead, exchange happens through connections, through knowledge of who has what, through the quiet network of people scattered across the mountains. You remember the visitor from before, the brief conversation, the shared information. That is where trade begins. Not with goods, but with awareness. You gather a few items, wrapping them carefully. There is a certain uncertainty in this process. You do not know if what you have will be enough. You do not know if the person you seek will have what you need. But you go anyway because standing still offers no answers. The path feels familiar now, though each journey carries its own weight. You move through the forest with steady steps, the bundle in your hands, a quiet reminder of your purpose. The air is cool, the ground firm beneath your boots. The mountains stretch out around you, vast and patient. After some time, you begin to recognize signs of another homestead. The faint outline of a clearing, the smell of smoke drifting through the trees, the subtle shift in the landscape that tells you someone has shaped this space just as you have shaped yours. You slow your approach. There is an unspoken etiquette here, a quiet respect for boundaries. You do not simply walk into someone else's space without acknowledgement. You make your presence known, stepping into view, allowing time for recognition. A figure appears. There is that same moment of stillness, of quiet assessment. Then a nod. You step closer. The conversation begins simply much like before. Greetings, brief exchanges, a sense of familiarity that grows not from frequent contact, but from shared experience. Then gradually the purpose of your visit emerges. You show what you have brought. The other person considers it, their expression, thoughtful rather than dismissive. They respond in kind, presenting what they might offer. A small container of salt. A tool that looks worn but still useful. The negotiation is not hurried. There is no fixed price, no clear standard. Value is discussed, weighed in terms of need and availability. You find yourself adjusting, considering what you are willing to give and what you hope to receive. A small but interesting practice, sometimes noted in these exchanges, is that fairness was often guided by reputation rather than strict measurement, with trust built over time through consistent, honest dealings. You can feel that principle at work here, the quiet expectation that both sides will act in good faith. You reach an agreement. Items are exchanged hands, passing goods back and forth with a sense of quiet finality. There is no written record, no formal acknowledgement, just mutual understanding. And with that, something shifts. The relationship deepens, even if only slightly. You spend a few moments more in conversation, sharing bits of information that may prove useful. Weather patterns, game sightings, small details that in another context might seem trivial, but here carry real significance. There is an ongoing question among those who study this way of life about how these informal economies functioned over time, whether they remained stable or were prone to imbalance. Standing here, it feels like a system built on necessity and adaptability rather than strict structure. Eventually, the moment comes to leave. There is no lingering farewell, just a quiet acknowledgement, a sense that this exchange, like many others, is part of an ongoing pattern. You step back into the forest, the items you received now in your possession. The walk home feels different. Not lighter exactly, but more complete. You have something you did not have before, something that will make the days ahead a little more manageable. When you reach your clearing, the cabin stands, as it always does, steady and familiar. You step inside, placing the newly acquired items carefully where they can be used. The salt in particular feels valuable in a way that is difficult to describe. A small amount, yet capable of extending the life of your food, of giving you a little more security. You sit near the fire, letting the warmth settle around you. Trade, you realise, is not just about goods. It is about connection, a quiet exchange that links you to others even across distance. A reminder that while you may live separately, your lives are not entirely independent. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the forest continues its steady rhythm. And inside, you hold on to the understanding that survival here is not just built on what you can do alone, but on what you can share, exchange, and carry forward together. The forest feels familiar now in a way that would have seemed impossible when you first arrived. The paths, once uncertain, have settled into your memory. The clearing feels less like borrowed space and more like something you belong to, at least for now. Even the sounds have become recognizable, each one fitting into a pattern you no longer question. And yet, there are moments when that sense of familiarity is interrupted. Moments when something new enters the quiet. You're working near the edge of your clearing when it happens. A sound reaches you, distant but distinct. Not the call of an animal or the rustle of wind through leaves, but something sharper. A rhythmic clatter, uneven but persistent. You pause, straightening slowly, your attention turning toward the direction of the noise. It grows clearer. Metal against something hard. A voice, faint at first, then more defined. You feel a small tightening in your chest, not quite fear, but alertness. Someone is approaching. You set down your tool and step back slightly, giving yourself a clearer view of the path. The trees shift as a figure moves through them, then another and another. Not just one person this time, but several. Travellers. They emerge into the clearing with the look of people who have come a long way. Their clothing is worn, their movements measured, but there is a sense of purpose in the way they carry themselves. One of them leads a mule, its sides marked with the dust of the trail. You stand still for a moment, taking it in. Encounters like this are not common, but they are not unheard of either. These mountains, despite their isolation, are crossed by those who have reason to pass through. Traders, hunters, sometimes even people moving toward new places, seeking opportunities beyond what they have known. In the early 1800s, certain trails through the Appalachian region served as informal routes for travellers and traders connecting distant settlements in ways that were often unreliable but still vital. You are seeing that reality unfold in front of you. The group slows as they approach, their eyes taking in your cabin. You're clearing the signs of your work. There is a pause. Then one of them steps forward slightly, offering a greeting. It is simple, direct, carrying both caution and openness. You respond in kind. The tension eases, though it does not disappear entirely. Out here, trust is not given instantly. It is built moment by moment through words and actions. They explain their purpose. Passing through, heading toward a settlement further along the ridge. The journey has been long, and they are looking for a place to rest briefly, perhaps to refill their water, to gather themselves before continuing. You consider this. There is always a balance to maintain. Offering help is part of the unspoken code of these mountains, but so is protecting what you have. You glance at your supplies, at the effort it took to gather them, and then back at the travellers. You nod. They move into the clearing with quiet appreciation. Their movements careful, respectful. The mule is led to a patch of ground where it can rest. Water is offered, drawn from your bucket and the nearby creek. The exchange is not formal, but it carries meaning. A small but interesting detail often mentioned in accounts of mountain life is that hospitality, even in times of scarcity, was considered an important value, with travellers often offered basic assistance despite limited resources. You can feel that principle guiding your actions now. The group settles for a short while. You sit with them near the fire, the conversation beginning slowly. Names are exchanged, though not all are offered. There is a sense that some things are shared while others are kept close. They speak of the path ahead, of conditions on the trail, of areas where the ground becomes difficult, where the weather has shifted unexpectedly. You listen closely, storing the information, knowing it may be useful one day. In return, you share what you know, the location of water sources, the patterns of game in the nearby forest, small details that might ease their journey. There is a quiet understanding in this exchange. Knowledge, like goods, holds value. One of the travellers reaches into a pack and produces something small, a piece of cloth perhaps, or a tool. It is offered not as payment, but as a gesture, a recognition of the help you have given. You accept it with a nod. The moment feels balanced, neither side owing the other, but both acknowledging the interaction. There is a thought that sometimes arises when looking back at these kinds of encounters, whether they were always as peaceful as they appear in memory, or whether tension and conflict were more common than recorded. Sitting here, you can sense both possibilities, the potential for cooperation and the quiet awareness that things could shift if circumstances changed. But today it remains calm. The travellers rest only briefly. There is no lingering, no extended pause. Their journey calls them forward, and they respond to it with a quiet readiness. Packs are lifted, the mule guided back onto the path. They thank you simply without excess. And then they are gone. The forest closes behind them, the sounds of their movement fading until they are indistinguishable from the natural rhythms of the mountains. You stand for a moment, looking in the direction they disappeared. The clearing feels different again, not empty but marked by the passage of others. A reminder that even in a place that feels isolated, there are paths that cross stories, that intersect lives, that move alongside your own, even if only briefly. You return to your work, picking up your tool, settling back into the rhythm you know. But something stays with you. A sense of connection that extends beyond the immediate surroundings. A recognition that this place, while quiet, is not still. It is part of a larger movement. People passing through, goods exchanged, information shared, and you standing here in your small clearing are part of that movement now. even if only for a moment at a time. The mountains have a way of holding tension quietly. It does not always arrive with noise or sudden movement. Sometimes it settles in slowly, like a change in the air. You only notice once it has already taken hold. You feel it today as you step outside the sky, pale and stretched thin, across the ridges, the forest, unusually still. There is work to be done, as always. You gather wood, check the edges of your field, move through your routine with steady focus. But beneath it all, there is a sense that something is different. Not wrong exactly, but unsettled. It becomes clearer later in the day. You hear voices again, sharper this time, carried on the wind in uneven bursts. Not the calm tones of a gathering, not the measured exchange of travellers. These voices rise and fall with an edge that catches your attention immediately. You pause listening. The sound is closer than you would expect. You set down your tools and move toward the edge of the clearing, your steps careful, your attention fixed on the direction of the noise. The forest seems to narrow around you, the space between the trees, feeling tighter, more focused. Then you see them, two figures standing a short distance apart in a small break in the trees. Their postures are rigid, their movements sharp. Even from here you can sense the tension between them, the way their words seem to push against one another rather than flow. You hesitate. This is not your conflict, not your place perhaps, and yet out here boundaries are not always so clear. The lives of those in these mountains overlap in ways that can be difficult to separate. You remain where you are, watching, listening, without stepping closer. Their voices carry fragments of meaning, a disagreement over land, perhaps, or the use of a path. The details are not entirely clear, but the weight of it is. Out here, even small disputes can grow, quickly shaped by the importance of every resource, every boundary. In these mountain communities, formal law enforcement was often distant or inconsistent, leaving many disagreements to be handled locally through personal negotiation or community involvement. You begin to understand how that reality shapes moments like this. The two figures stand their ground. There is no immediate resolution, no sudden easing of the tension. Instead, the conversation circles each person holding firm, their words repeating in slightly different forms, as if searching for a way forward that neither fully trusts. You feel a quiet unease, not because the situation has turned violent, but because of how easily it could. The isolation that defines this place also means that conflicts once begun can linger without easy intervention. A small, often overlooked aspect of life in these regions is the importance of reputation. The way a person handles disputes, the choices they make, in moments like this, can shape how they are seen by others for years to come. You can almost sense that awareness in the way these two individuals hold themselves. Careful, measured, but firm. The conversation shifts slightly. One of them gestures toward the ground, indicating a line, a space that seems to matter deeply. The other responds with a shake of the head, a refusal to accept what is being proposed. There is a pause, a long one. The forest around them remains still as if waiting. Then slowly the tension begins to ease. Not completely, not in a way that suggests full agreement, but enough that the sharp edge of their voices softens. The gestures become less rigid. The space between them feels less charged. They speak again more quietly now. You cannot hear the words clearly, but the tone has changed. It carries something closer to negotiation, to reluctant compromise. It is not a perfect resolution, but it is movement. There is an idea often explored when looking back at these communities that many disputes were settled through practical arrangements rather than strict adherence to formal rules. Standing here, it feels like that idea is unfolding in real time. Eventually, the two figures step back, not together, not in shared agreement, but with a sense that the immediate conflict has been contained. One turns and moves away, disappearing into the trees. The other lingers for a moment, then follows in a different direction. And just like that, the clearing is empty again. You remain where you are for a few moments longer, letting the quiet return. The forest resumes its usual rhythm, the subtle sounds of wind and distant movement, filling the space where tension had been. You step back toward your own clearing, your thoughts lingering on what you have seen. Out here, life is shaped not just by the land, but by the relationships between those who live on it. Boundaries matter. Resources matter. And when those things come into question, the outcomes are rarely simple. You return to your work, picking up your tools, continuing where you left off. But there is a new awareness now, a recognition that survival here is not only about effort and preparation, but also about balance, about how you navigate the spaces between yourself and others. The fire waits for you again as evening approaches. You tend it carefully, the familiar motion bringing a sense of calm. The warmth spreads through the cabin, the light soft against the walls. You sit for a while, letting the day settle. The memory of the voices, the tension, the gradual easing of it all remain with you. Not as something dramatic, but as a quiet reminder that even in a place defined by distance and solitude, human connection in all its forms continues to shape the landscape. You lean back, listening to the steady crackle of the fire, the forest beyond. And you understand something simple but important. Out here, peace is not something given. It is something maintained, carefully, one moment, one choice at a time. The weather does not announce itself with certainty. It hints first, a shift in the wind, a heaviness in the sky that seems to press lower over the ridges. You notice it as you step outside, the air carrying a damp edge, the kind that settles into your clothes and stays there. You pause, looking upward. Clouds gather slowly, thickening as they stretch across the mountains. The light feels muted, as though the sun is being filtered through layers of something dense and heavy. You have learned to pay attention to these signs, not because you enjoy reading them, but because you must. You move through your morning tasks with a quiet urgency. The fire is built stronger than usual. Wood is brought closer to the cabin, stacked within reach. Tools are gathered and set inside where they will not be exposed. There is a sense of preparation in everything you do. Storms in these mountains can arrive quickly, and when they do, they change the landscape in ways that are not always predictable. Rain can turn paths into slick channels of mud. Wind can bring down branches, sometimes entire trees. You glance toward your field. The plants stand steady for now, their leaves shifting slightly in the growing breeze. You wonder how they will hold if the weather turns harsh. There is little you can do beyond hope that they endure. A distant roll of thunder reaches you, low, deep, not yet close, but moving in your direction. You step back into the cabin and check the roof, your eyes scanning for any place where water might find its way through. The structure holds, though you know it is not perfect. It was built with care, but also with limitations. There is always some uncertainty. In these mountains, sudden storms were a regular part of life, especially in warmer months, often forming quickly and bringing heavy rain or strong winds that could disrupt even well-prepared homesteads. You can feel that pattern unfolding now. The wind picks up. At first, it moves gently through the trees, a steady rustling that seems almost soothing, but gradually it gains strength. The branches begin to sway more noticeably, their movement less fluid, more forceful. You step outside once more, feeling the shift. The air carries the scent of rain, now sharp and unmistakable. It is close. You move quickly, securing what you can. The door is checked. Loose items are brought inside. You take one last look at the clearing, at the forest beyond, and then you return to the cabin as the first drops begin to fall. They are light at first, soft taps against the roof, barely noticeable, but they grow quickly, the sound building into a steady rhythm that fills the space around you. You sit near the fire listening. The rain intensifies, each drop striking with more force. The roof holds, though you can hear the water finding its way along the wooden shingles, dripping in places, forming small uneven patterns. The wind follows. It presses against the walls, not violently, but with a persistent strength that reminds you of how thin the barrier is between you and the elements outside. You feel it in the structure, a subtle shift, a slight movement enough to remind you that this cabin, sturdy as it may seem, is still part of the landscape, not separate from it. A small but fascinating belief, once held in parts of the mountains, suggested that certain bird calls before a storm could indicate how severe it might become. You think back to the morning, to the quiet, to the absence of sound, and wonder if that silence was its own kind of warning. The storm continues. Time becomes difficult to measure. The steady drumming of rain creates a kind of rhythm that pulls your attention inward. You focus on the fire, on keeping it alive, despite the dampness creeping into the air. Each piece of wood is added carefully, maintaining the balance between flame and smoke. Outside, the forest responds. You hear branches shifting, leaves thrashing against one another. Occasionally a sharper crack echoes through the storm, the sound of something giving way under the strain. You sit still, listening. There is nothing you can do out there now. The work is done, the preparation complete. All that remains is to endure. There is a quiet humility in this moment, a recognition that no matter how much effort you put into shaping your environment, there are forces here that remain beyond your control. The mountains, the weather, the shifting patterns of nature. You are part of it, not separate from it. Gradually, the storm begins to ease. The rain softens first, the heavy drops giving way to a lighter, more scattered pattern. The wind follows its force, diminishing until it becomes a gentle movement once more. You wait a little longer, then slowly you rise and step toward the door. You open it carefully. The air outside is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth and leaves. The clearing looks different now, darker, the ground slick and uneven. Small streams of water run where there were none before tracing new paths through the soil. You step out, moving cautiously. Your eyes scan the area. A branch has fallen near the edge of the clearing, its leaves still trembling slightly. The field is held, though the plants lean under the weight of the rain, their resilience tested but not broken. You take a slow breath. Relief settles in, quiet but present. The storm has passed and you are still here. You walk a little further, checking the surroundings, noting what has changed. The forest feels alive again, the sounds returning gradually as the storm moves away. And with it, the tension fades. You return to the cabin, the fire still burning inside. The warmth greets you as you step in the familiar space, offering a sense of steadiness once more. You sit down, letting the events of the day settle into memory. Storms will come again, stronger perhaps, or weaker. Each one different, each one carrying its own challenges. But for now, there is calm, a quiet moment between one test and the next. And as you sit there, listening to the last drops of rain falling from the trees, you understand something that feels both simple and profound. Out here, survival is not about avoiding the storm. It is about learning how to stand through it. The storm leaves more than wet ground behind. It leaves a feeling, something subtle but persistent, as if the mountains themselves have shifted slightly. You notice it the next morning when you step outside. The air is clearer, sharper, and the forest carries a brightness that feels almost new. But there is something else, a sound that does not belong. At first it is faint, easy to mistake for distant thunder or the echo of falling water. But as you stand still and listen, it becomes clearer. A steady repeating rhythm, metallic, almost unnatural against the quiet backdrop of the mountains. You turn toward it instinctively. The sound is far off, but it travels in a way that feels deliberate, as if it is carving its own path through the ridges. You cannot see its source, but you know it's not part of the world you have come to understand. Not entirely. You move through your morning with that sound lingering in your thoughts. The fire is tended, water is carried, the routine unfolds as it always does. But now there is a thread of curiosity woven into everything you do. What is it? You step beyond your clearing, following a path that leads higher along the ridge. The ground is still damp from the storm, the earth soft beneath your boots. Leaves cling to your steps, and the air carries the scent of rain mixed with something faintly unfamiliar. The sound grows louder, still distant but more defined now. A pattern emerges, a rhythm that does not change, does not drift or fade. It continues steady and insistent. As you reach a higher point, the trees thin just enough to offer a view beyond the immediate forest, and they're far across the valley you see it. Not clearly, not in detail, but enough. A line cutting through the landscape, straight, unnatural, a break in the pattern of trees that feels deliberate rather than accidental. And along that line, small movements, shapes that shift and change, accompanied by that steady metallic rhythm. You stand still watching. In the later part of the 1800s, railroads began to push into parts of the Appalachian region, bringing with them new forms of movement, trade, and connection that had not existed before. You are witnessing the edge of that change. It feels distant yet close enough to matter. You remain there for a while, observing. The line does not move, but the activity along it does. Figures small from this distance working, moving, shaping the land in a way that feels very different from the slow, patient effort you know. This is something else. Faster, more direct, less bound by the contours of the mountains. You feel a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. The world beyond your clearing has always been present, but it has remained just out of reach, something you could imagine but not fully experience. Now it feels closer, more immediate. You turn and begin the walk back. The forest closes around you again, the familiar patterns returning. The sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves, the steady presence of the creek. And yet that distant rhythm remains in your mind, echoing faintly even as it fades from your ears. Back at the cabin, you set down your tools and pause. The space feels the same. The fire, the field, the clearing. Everything you have built, everything you have come to rely on remains unchanged. But your awareness has shifted. A small but intriguing observation found in some accounts is that the arrival of railroads and logging operations in these mountains brought not only economic opportunity, but also tension, as traditional ways of life encountered new systems of work and movement. You can sense the beginning of that tension even from a distance. You sit near the fire, your thoughts drifting. What would it mean for this place if that line moved closer? If the sound you heard today became a regular presence, no longer distant but near, would it make life easier, or would it change something more fundamental? There is no clear answer. Some might see it as progress, a way to connect these isolated spaces to a broader world. Others might see it as an intrusion, a disruption of the balance that has allowed life here to continue in its own steady way. You lean back slightly, watching the fire. The flames move in familiar patterns, steady and predictable. Outside the forest continues its quiet rhythm, unchanged by what lies beyond the ridges. For now, as evening settles in, the light fades gently, the shadows stretching across the clearing. The mountains return to their usual stillness, the distant sounds disappearing into the vastness. But you know they are still there. That line, that movement, that change. It does not demand your attention immediately. It does not alter your task tomorrow or the day after. The fire will still need tending. The water will still need carrying. And yet it lingers. A reminder that even in a place that feels timeless, change is always approaching, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. You sit quietly, letting that thought settle. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with a quiet awareness. The mountains may feel constant, but they are not untouched, and neither are you. The sound you heard the day before does not return, at least not in the same way. Morning arrives with its usual quiet, the kind that settles gently over the clearing, wrapping everything in a sense of stillness that feels almost protective. You step outside, half expecting to hear that distant rhythm again, but the forest offers only its familiar language, wind through branches, the faint call of birds, the soft movement of leaves underfoot. It is as if nothing has changed, and yet something has. You feel it not in the air, but in your thoughts. As you move through your routine, tending the fire, carrying water, checking the edges of your field, there is a question that lingers quietly in the background. How long will you stay? It is not a question you have allowed yourself to consider fully before. Survival has taken all of your attention each day, filled with immediate needs that leave little room for reflection. But now, with that glimpse of something beyond the mountains, the question rises more clearly. You pause at the edge of your clearing, looking out over the trees. The ridges stretch into the distance, layered one behind another, fading into a soft haze. It is a view you have come to know well, one that once felt overwhelming, but now carries a certain familiarity. This place has shaped you. Your hands bear the marks of it. Your movements have adjusted to its rhythms. Even your thoughts have slowed, settling into a pace that matches the steady passage of days here. And still the question remains. You turn back towards the cabin. It stands as it always has, solid and quiet, the result of your effort and persistence. Every log, every small detail carries a memory of the work it took to bring it into being. Leaving would mean stepping away from all of that. You move inside, sitting near the fire, letting the warmth settle around you. The familiar space feels smaller now, not in a limiting way, but in a defined one. It is yours, shaped by your choices, your labour. But beyond it, there is something else. Paths that lead further than you have travelled. Places where the land opens differently. Where the sounds you heard might be closer, clearer. You find yourself imagining it. A road that does not twist and rise unpredictably, but stretches more evenly. A place where goods are easier to obtain, where tools and supplies do not depend on chance encounters or long journeys. It is not a fully formed vision, just fragments. You stand again, stepping back outside. The air is cool, the light steady. The forest holds its usual calm, as if unaware of the thoughts moving through you. You walk a short distance, following the path you know so well. Each step feels grounded, certain. This place offers something that is difficult to define, but easy to feel. A kind of steadiness, a connection to the land that grows stronger with each passing day. But it also demands something in return: effort, endurance, a willingness to face each challenge without certainty of outcome. You stop and look around. The trees, the uneven ground, the small signs of life you have learned to recognize. It is not easy, and it is not meant to be. There is a quiet tension in this realization. The idea that staying means continuing this life with all its demands and uncertainties, and leaving means stepping into something unknown, trading one kind of challenge for another. Some who lived in these mountains chose to remain, building lives that stretched across generations, rooted deeply in the land. Others moved on, drawn by opportunities elsewhere, by the promise of something different. You can see both paths. Neither one feels simple. You return to the clearing, the cabin coming into view once more. The fire will need tending again soon. The water will need to be carried. The routine waits for you, steady and familiar. You step inside, adding a piece of wood to the fire, watching as the flames catch and grow. There is comfort in that, in knowing what comes next. But the thought remains. Not urgent, not demanding an immediate answer, just present. You sit for a while, letting it settle. Out here, decisions are not made quickly. They form slowly, shaped by experience, by observation, by the quiet accumulation of days. You do not need to decide today or tomorrow. For now you are here, and that is enough. The fire crackles softly, the light steady against the walls. Outside the mountains hold their silence. And within that silence, the question lingers, not as a burden, but as a possibility. The morning arrives gently, as if it understands this is not a day for urgency. You wake slowly, the warmth of the fire lingering just enough to soften the cold. For a moment you remain still listening. The forest breathes in its quiet way, the same steady rhythm that has carried you through each day since you arrived. Nothing demands your attention immediately, and that in itself feels different. You sit up moving with a calm that has settled into your body over time. The routines are still there waiting. The fire needs tending. Water must be gathered. But there is no rush in your movements now, no sense of being pulled forward. Instead, you move with intention. You stir the embers, adding a small piece of wood, watching as the flame builds slowly. The light flickers across the cabin walls, tracing the familiar shapes you have come to know so well. This place has changed you, not in a sudden or dramatic way, but gradually, through repetition and quiet persistence. You notice it in the way you move, in how your hands work without hesitation, in how your thoughts no longer race ahead of the moment you are in. You step outside. The air is cool but not harsh. The clearing stretches before you, the ground worn in places, the field standing as a quiet record of your effort. The trees beyond remain steady, their presence both constant and reassuring. You walk slowly, taking it in. Each detail feels clearer somehow. The way the light settles on the leaves, the faint sound of water in the distance, the subtle shift of the breeze as it moves through the branches. These are things you might not have noticed before. Or perhaps you noticed them without truly seeing them. Now they feel central. You move toward the edge of the clearing where the forest begins. You do not step into it right away. Instead, you pause, looking out across the landscape that has shaped your days. The ridges rise and fall in soft layers, stretching further than you can easily follow. There is a vastness here, but it no longer feels overwhelming. It feels familiar. There is a quiet understanding forming in this moment. Life here is not defined by a single experience or even a series of dramatic events. It is built from the steady repetition of small actions, the fire you keep alive, the water you carry, the soil you tend, each one simple on its own. Together they form something lasting. You turn back towards the cabin, walking at an unhurried pace. Inside, the fire continues its steady burn. You sit near it, letting the warmth settle into you once more. Your thoughts drift not toward what must be done next, but toward what has already been done. The days behind you, the effort, the uncertainty, the quiet moments of connection both with others and with the land itself. They do not stand out individually. Instead, they blend together, forming a continuous thread that carries you forward. There is something calming in that, a sense that not everything needs to be separate or distinct, that life can be understood as a flow, a steady movement from one moment to the next. You lean back slightly, the firelight soft against your face. The question from before still lingers, whether to stay, whether to leave. But it feels different now, less pressing, more like a quiet companion than a problem to solve, because you understand something that may not have been clear before. Where you are matters, but how you live matters more. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds around you. The crackle of the fire, the faint movement of the forest beyond the walls. it is enough. And as the day begins to soften into evening, you allow yourself to settle more deeply into that feeling. The light fades slowly, the shadows stretching across the cabin floor. The air cools, but the fire holds steady, its warmth constant. You breathe in, then out, letting the rhythm guide you. There is no need to rush, no need to decide everything at once. The mountains will remain. The paths will still be there whether you choose to follow them or not. For now, you are here, and that is all that is required. The fire burns lower its glow, softening the light, becoming gentler, less defined. The edges of the room blur slightly, the shapes settling into a quiet stillness. Outside, the forest rests. Inside, you do the same, your thoughts slow drifting, like the last traces of smoke rising from the fire. There is no urgency left in them, no sharp edges, just a quiet awareness, a sense of being part of something steady and enduring. You let that feeling carry you, gently, without effort, and as the final warmth of the fire settles around you, the world becomes softer, quieter, more distant. You are still here, and that is enough. Now the fire dims a little further, and the night seems to wrap itself around everything, smoothing out the edges of the day. You can almost feel the mountains breathing slowly, as if the land itself is settling into rest alongside you. The sounds beyond the cabin grow softer, less distinct, blending into a steady hush that feels both distant and comforting. Your body follows that rhythm, the weight of the day and all the days before it begins to ease. Not disappearing, but loosening like a knot slowly unwinding. The work, the effort, the questions that lingered, they drift further away, becoming less immediate, less important. You focus instead on the simplest things. The warmth against your skin, the steady rise and fall of your breath, the quiet glow of embers fading gently into darkness. There is nothing more you need to do. Nothing left to carry or prepare. Just this moment. The mountains will still be there in the morning, just as they have always been. The paths, the trees, the quiet routines, waiting patiently for your return. But for now, they rest, and so do you. Your thoughts slow even further, stretching out, becoming softer, until they are little more than gentle impressions. The sense of the cabin around you, the forest beyond, the steady presence of the land, all blending into something calm and unbroken. You let yourself drift. No effort, no resistance. Just a quiet, steady descent into rest. And as the last trace of light fades, and the night settles fully, you find yourself carried into a place of stillness where everything feels distant and peaceful. A place where the mountains are quiet and you are safe. Sweet dreams.